The rain had been relentless for hours, a soft, rhythmic pounding against the window pane of Denise's small apartment in St. Louis. It wasn't unusual for this time of year, but today, the sound felt heavier, almost symbolic. The rain had a way of washing everything clean, but it didn't do much for what was buried deep inside. Denise sat by the window, watching the water pool in the street below, streaking away as cars sped by. The world outside was muted, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Inside, the apartment felt just as quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound to break the silence. The coffee cup on the table in front of her remained untouched, the steam from it curling lazily into the air, but Denise wasn't interested in the warmth of it. She could hardly feel anything but the cold creeping into her thoughts. She glanced around the room at the worn-out furniture, the half-opened book on the coffee table, the small pile of laundry she hadn't gotten to yet. Each piece of the space felt like a reflection of her own life. Messy, unfinished, not quite where it should be. But then again, how could it be? Life had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them, and Denise had learned that the hard way. It had been 6 months since the accident. 6 months since the phone call she never expected to receive. 6 months since everything had shattered. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, harsh and final. "You'll never get over this. You'll never be the same." The words had pierced through her like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. They still lingered in her thoughts, cropping up at the most unexpected times. Like now, when the rain was falling in steady sheets and she was left alone with her memories. Denise had heard the same thing from others too. The therapists, the doctors, even friends. The world had assumed she wouldn't heal, that she'd remain fragile and broken forever. But they didn't know Denise. She wasn't fragile. She had fought too hard to let that happen. The road to recovery hadn't been easy. It hadn't been pretty. There had been days when she couldn't get out of bed, when even the simplest tasks felt insurmountable. There had been nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of her own grief pressing down on her chest. But despite it all, Denise had never given up. She hadn't given up on herself, on her healing. She stood up slowly, the ache in her body reminding her of the months of physical therapy, the stretches she had to do daily, the exercises that had once seemed impossible. Every movement felt like a victory, a small one, but a victory nonetheless. She walked over to the kitchen, her footsteps muffled against the hardwood floor, and poured herself a glass of water, her reflection in the window a ghostly outline against the downpour outside. The thing that had hurt the most wasn't the accident itself. It wasn't the physical scars or the pain that had taken over her body. It was the way people treated her afterward. They saw the woman in the wheelchair, the woman with the cane, and they assumed that's all she was. The accident defined her in their eyes. But it didn't define her. Not to Denise. She had spent years working to carve out a life that was hers. A life that was independent, strong, and full of promise. But all of that felt like it had crumbled in an instant. It wasn't just the physical recovery that was hard. It was the emotional peace, the way she felt invisible in the eyes of the world, as though she had become someone they pitied, someone they underestimated. She could still hear the voices, the ones that had said she wouldn't make it, that she'd never fully recover, that she should just accept it, that healing wasn't a reality for someone like her. But Denise knew something they didn't, something deep inside her that no one could take away. She had never been a quitter. She would never be a quitter. The sound of the door creaking open broke her from her thoughts. Denise didn't turn. She knew who it was. Anna, her best friend since high school, stepped inside, dripping wet from the rain. Denise could hear the rustle of her jacket as she shook it off, the tap of her shoes on the floor as she moved into the living room. Anna's presence was always a comfort, a steadying force in Denise's life. But today there was something different in the air. Denise could feel it, the tension, the hesitation. "Denise!" Anna's voice broke through the quiet, soft but tentative. Denise finally turned to face her, a half-smile tugging at her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey!" she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Rain's coming down pretty hard out there." "Huh?" Anna didn't immediately respond. Instead, she stepped further into the room, pausing as she took in Denise's still form by the window, the glass of water in her hand. For a moment, Denise couldn't help but notice the look on her face. An odd mix of concern and something else. Something that made her stomach twist. "I didn't want to come by like this," Anna said, her words carefully measured. "But I think we need to talk." Denise raised an eyebrow, her grip tightening on the glass in her hand. "About what?" Anna shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the uncertainty in her movements obvious. "I've been talking to a therapist," she said softly, "and she really thinks you should come with me. She says it's time you face what happened. Time to start really moving forward." Denise's heart skipped a beat. Anna's words felt like a blow to the chest. She had always been supportive, always encouraged her to keep going. But this felt different. There was an edge to it now, as if Anna was telling her that it was time to get over it. As if the world expected Denise to be done with it by now. Denise set the glass down slowly, her fingers trembling as she did so. She met Anna's eyes, her own calm but with a storm brewing behind them. "I'm not broken, Anna," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "I've been healing. I've been doing this my way. I don't need someone to tell me how to feel or when to be done with it." Anna's face softened, but she didn't look away. I don't know, Denise. It's been months, and you're still. Still what?" Denise interrupted, her voice sharper than she meant. She took a deep breath and softened it. "Still fighting? Still getting back to myself." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I'm healing, Anna. But on my terms." Anna's silence stretched for a moment, and then she stepped closer, her hand reaching out in an almost apologetic gesture. "I'm just trying to help, Denise. I know it's been hard. I just want you to feel better." Denise could feel the old anger, the frustration, bubbling to the surface. It wasn't anger at Anna. It was anger at the world, at everyone who had doubted her, at everyone who had assumed she was broken and beyond repair. They hadn't seen her fight, her determination, and they wouldn't. "Helping me means believing in me," Denise said quietly, her eyes meeting Anna's with a quiet fierceness. "Not telling me I'm not healed enough yet." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Anna just looked at her, processing what had been said. There was a long pause, and then Anna's face shifted, the apology in her eyes giving way to something else. Something that wasn't pity. It was respect. Denise stood up slowly, straightening her back as if putting on a mantle of quiet strength. "I'm not your project," she said softly. "I'm not something that needs fixing. I'm someone who's been through something, and I'm coming out the other side. In my own time." Anna stood there for a long moment, her eyes searching Denise's face. Then, with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "Okay, I understand. But you know where to find me if you need me." Denise nodded in return, feeling a strange calm settle over her. She knew she had made her point. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. And she wasn't about to let anyone make her feel like she was. As Anna left, the rain continued its steady fall outside. But inside, there was a sense of peace settling over Denise, a peace that had been hard-earned. And she knew deep down that this was just the beginning of her quiet triumph. The rain didn't let up the next morning. It had come down all night, filling the streets with the kind of heavy silence that only stormy weather could bring. Denise pulled on her worn sneakers, the soles of them barely holding up against the slippery pavement outside. She had an appointment in the city, something she'd been putting off for weeks now. It wasn't the kind of thing she enjoyed, but the emails had been relentless, the reminders insistent. It was time to visit the one place she avoided most, the doctor's office. As she walked toward the bus stop, the weight of the city around her felt different. The familiar buildings that lined the street in St. Louis looked more imposing today, their towering glass windows reflecting the darkened sky above. The people passing by seemed to move at double speed, all on their way somewhere important. Denise felt like she was moving in slow motion, the world moving too fast around her, her feet heavy as though they were stuck in cement. She hadn't been to the doctor since the accident. It had been part of her refusal to acknowledge what had happened to her. Instead of embracing the care and attention she needed, Denise had found herself retreating, walling off her emotions, pushing away everything that might have reminded her of the life she was trying to rebuild. After all, everyone expected her to be the strong one, the resilient one, the one who bounced back. But there were days like today when she wasn't sure if she could. She boarded the bus, the familiar smell of leather seats and the slight hum of the engine settling around her. Denise sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes focused on the rain-soaked streets outside. The world was moving forward, and Denise was stuck in place. Every person she saw, walking with purpose, talking with someone on the phone, laughing, moving fast, reminded her of how slow her own progress felt. She should have been better by now, shouldn't she? People were waiting for her to get back to normal. But what did that even mean? What was normal anymore? The bus jerked to a stop, pulling Denise from her thoughts. She stood up, moving toward the door. As she stepped off the bus and walked into the clinic's waiting area, a sense of dread washed over her. The sterile, almost clinical smell of disinfectant filled her nostrils, mixing with the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The receptionist greeted her with a forced smile, her eyes flicking over to the sign-in sheet. "Name?" the receptionist asked, as though reading from a script. "Denise Carter," she said quietly, pulling out her ID and signing in. The waiting room was filled with people. Elderly men and women, young parents holding their children, all gathered together in the same place, their shared frustration hanging in the air. Everyone was waiting for their turn. Everyone was waiting for something to change. Denise found an empty seat in the corner and tried to make herself small, a practice she had perfected over the years. She pulled her phone from her pocket and scrolled aimlessly through her messages, looking at nothing in particular. The silence in the room felt suffocating, the soft murmurs of the other patients somehow more oppressive than comforting. As she tapped through the apps, Denise's finger paused over an old message from her mother. She had sent it months ago, shortly after the accident. "You need to stop pretending like you're fine. You're not. You're broken, Denise. You always will be." The words stung even now, even after everything. Denise set her phone down, feeling a tightness in her chest. She hadn't replied to her mother's message. She had stopped replying to everything from her mother a long time ago. The guilt, the shame, the constant judgment. It was too much, but it was the disappointment that hurt the most. The thought of it all made her feel smaller, insignificant in a world that seemed to keep moving forward with or without her. When her name was called, Denise stood up and followed the nurse down the sterile hallway. The walls were white, with little artwork or decoration, a simple, clinical space that seemed designed to make her feel even more disconnected from the world around her. The doctor's office was just as impersonal. The usual small talk began, the polite introduction, the standard questions. How had she been feeling? Had there been any changes in her recovery? How was she managing everything emotionally? The doctor asked the same questions every time, and Denise gave the same answers. She was fine. She was doing well. She was getting better. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. There was something missing in her recovery. There was a piece of her, a part of herself, that she hadn't been able to reach. The doctor made a few notes, then gave her a quick smile. "I know it's tough, but you're doing great. Keep up with your therapy, and let's check back in a few months." Denise nodded, though she wasn't sure if she agreed with that assessment. "Thanks," she said quietly, feeling the weight of the room press in on her again. The moment she stepped out of that office, the facade she had built up would fall again. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't ready for the vulnerability that came with admitting just how far she had left to go. On the walk back to her apartment, the rain had stopped, but the heaviness in the air remained. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that came from the weight of the rain, it was the weight of expectations. Expectations from her mother, from her friends, from the world around her. They all wanted her to heal faster, to be stronger, to be better. But none of them understood the journey. They didn't know what it felt like to be told you'd never be the same, that you'd always be a little broken, a little too fragile to make it. But Denise wasn't fragile. She was rebuilding one step at a time, even if the world didn't see it. As she passed by a park, a group of kids playing basketball caught her attention. She stopped for a moment, watching them with a bittersweet smile. She used to play basketball with her brother before everything had changed. She remembered the sound of the ball bouncing on the pavement, the laughter between the shots, the joy that had once been so easy to find. But that joy felt distant now. Still, she knew it was there, somewhere, buried beneath everything. And if she kept fighting, kept pushing forward, she'd find it again. Denise turned away from the basketball court and walked home, the weight of the world still on her shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel as heavy. She knew the journey would take time, and she was okay with that. The days after the doctor's visit felt like a blur. Denise wasn't sure if it was the rain that never seemed to stop or the weight of her thoughts, but time had started to feel slippery, like she couldn't quite grasp it. She spent her mornings in therapy, her afternoons alone in her apartment, and her evenings in quiet reflection. Every now and then, she'd try to call her mother, but those calls were never easy. They usually ended in awkward silences, guilt-tripped pleasantries, and a sense that they were both pretending to be something they weren't. But there was something inside Denise that was slowly beginning to shift. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't obvious. But she could feel it deep within her. It was as though her strength was slowly building itself back up, piece by piece, without anyone noticing. She had started going for walks in the afternoons, something she hadn't done in months. The first time she stepped out the door, it was as if she were rediscovering the world. The quiet streets of St. Louis, with its old brick houses and familiar storefronts, felt more alive than they had in a long time. The world wasn't as heavy when she was walking through it. It was lighter, more manageable, even if just for those few minutes when she was moving at her own pace. She passed by a cafe on the corner near her building, a place she used to go to with friends. As she stopped to glance at the menu posted outside, she saw a familiar face behind the counter. It was Carla, an old acquaintance from her days at the university. Carla had been part of the crowd that had once been so supportive, but since the accident, she had disappeared from Denise's life, just like everyone else who didn't know how to deal with the new version of her. The version that had to rely on a cane, the version that wasn't as quick to jump in on a conversation anymore. Denise! Carla's voice was tentative, and Denise turned, surprised to see her standing there. Carla, she said, smiling a little, though it was strained. I didn't know you still came here, Carla said, glancing nervously at the coffee machine she was working on. I'm sorry. I've been meaning to check in, but I didn't know what to say. I know things have been hard for you. Denise took a deep breath, feeling the usual discomfort in her chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but it was something close to it, the weight of unspoken words that had been left in the air for far too long. I've been trying to keep busy, Denise replied, her voice steady. Trying to heal. Carla nodded, but there was something else in her eyes, an expression of uncertainty, like she wasn't sure if she should say more or if she had already said too much. Denise could see the hesitation, the awkwardness that people had around her since the accident. The truth was, Denise had always been the strong one, the one who held things together for everyone else. And now, with this new version of herself, people didn't know how to react. It's good to see you out and about, Carla said, breaking the silence. If you ever want to grab a coffee or... I'm okay, Carla, Denise interrupted, not unkindly but firmly. I don't need pity. Carla opened her mouth, but Denise could already see the wheels turning. Carla wasn't trying to pity her. Denise knew that, but it didn't make it easier to hear those words, to see the way people tiptoed around her like she was fragile. I didn't mean it like that, Carla said quickly. I guess I don't know how to act around you anymore. Denise felt the weight of those words sink in. She had never asked for anyone to act differently around her, but somehow, it seemed like everyone had decided she was someone else now. She was still the same person. She was still the woman who loved to laugh at bad jokes, who loved to cook meals for friends, who loved to walk down the street and feel the sun on her face. But no one saw that anymore. They saw only the scars, the visible signs of what she had endured, and they couldn't seem to look past them. "I'm still me, Carla," Denise said, her voice softer now, but still firm. "I'm not fragile. I'm not broken. I'm just healing. It's a process." Carla studied her for a moment, and then a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm sorry, Denise. I didn't mean to make you feel like I was treating you differently." Denise nodded, feeling the tension between them start to ease. "It's okay. Just treat me like you always did. I don't need anyone to walk on eggshells around me." As she turned to leave, she heard Carla call out, "Hey, Denise." She stopped and looked back. "I'm glad you're doing better," Carla said, her voice genuine. "Really?" Denise didn't say anything, but she gave. To do. She still had healing to do. But today, for the first time in a long time, it felt like the world wasn't moving so fast around her. It felt like she was catching up, inch by inch, day by day. Later that evening, after a long day of work and reflection, Denise sat in her apartment with a cup of tea, looking out the window. The sun was starting to set, casting a soft orange glow over the city. She had just received a message from her therapist. It was a reminder for her next session, scheduled for tomorrow. She set her phone down on the table. Tomorrow will be another step, another chance to confront the past, to confront the shame, the self-doubt, the lingering fears that had held her back for so long. But tonight, Denise allowed herself a small victory. She had stood up for herself today. She had faced the uncomfortable reality of how others saw her and still pushed forward. The balance was beginning to shift. She wasn't healed. Not yet, but she was getting there. Slowly, steadily, one step at a time. And that was enough. The weeks continued to pass by, each day marked by incremental changes. Small victories that felt monumental in their own right. For Denise, it was the little things that began to shift the balance. The morning walks through her neighborhood in St. Louis, the occasional chat with strangers that used to feel impossible, and even the quiet strength she found in her reflection every time she looked in the mirror. But despite these small triumphs, there was still something missing, something she hadn't quite confronted. The world outside her apartment felt like a moving carousel, everyone else going on with their lives, and she was still stuck on the sidelines, watching. Each day, she tried to convince herself she was making progress. But there was always a lingering thought at the back of her mind. How much of her recovery was real, and how much of it was just a story she was telling herself. One evening, after work, Denise sat on the porch of her apartment in the early evening warmth, watching the sunset. The sky over St. Louis was painted with deep oranges and purples, a canvas that looked almost too perfect to be real. It made her feel small and insignificant, but also connected to something bigger. She closed her eyes, allowing the cool breeze to wash over her. That's when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Denise!" She turned, startled, as Anna stepped out from the door. Denise hadn't expected to see her, especially not tonight. Anna was holding a paper bag from the local corner store, the kind that carried a bit of everything: groceries, snacks, sometimes even small trinkets from the past. She looked uncertain, unsure of herself, her eyes darting nervously between Denise and the empty chair next to her. "Do you mind if I join you?" Anna asked hesitantly. Denise smiled faintly, shifting to make space on the porch. "Not at all," she said. "It's been a while, huh?" Anna nodded, settling into the chair beside her. She opened the bag and pulled out 2 sodas, handing one to Denise. It was a small gesture, one that felt almost too casual for the conversation that was about to unfold. Denise took the can, but she didn't immediately open it. "You've been quiet lately," Anna said, her tone soft but serious. "I've been meaning to check in." Denise wasn't sure how to respond at first. She could feel the weight of the conversation already. She didn't want to admit the depth of her struggle to Anna, not after everything that had already happened. But there was no use pretending anymore. They had been through too much for Denise to hide behind walls she had built herself. "I'm healing," Denise said quietly, her voice steady but not as firm as she wanted it to be. "I'm trying, but I don't think it's happening the way people want it to." Anna shifted uncomfortably, then leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees. What do you mean? It's like, everyone thinks I should be better by now. I should be over it. And sometimes I wonder if they're right. If maybe I'm not trying hard enough? Denise said, her words coming out faster than she'd intended. The truth was, she wasn't just talking about her physical recovery. She was talking about everything, the emotional weight, the isolation, the pressure to be someone she wasn't anymore. It was the pressure to heal according to some schedule that wasn't her own, and the quiet judgment that came from those who thought they understood. Anna didn't say anything at first. She just sat there watching Denise. Then finally she spoke. You know, I don't think anyone gets it, not really. Not until they've been in your shoes. And even then, it's different. We're all walking through our own messes. Denise raised an eyebrow, turning her head slightly to look at Anna. You sound like you've been thinking about this for a while. Anna laughed softly, though it sounded almost like a nervous reflex. Yeah, I guess I have. You've been carrying so much on your own, Denver. I think I've been guilty of thinking it was easy for you, too, like you'd just get over it. But I know that's not how this works. I'm sorry if I've made it harder. Denise nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what to say to that. The truth was, she hadn't been able to get over it. Not yet. The memory of that night. The crash, the noise, the darkness that seemed to swallow her whole, was still vivid in her mind. It had left marks on her that weren't just physical. But the thing was, Denise didn't know how to explain that to Anna. It wasn't just about the recovery. It wasn't about the pain. It was about the way everything had changed. How people saw her differently. How even Anna had begun to treat her like she wasn't the same person anymore. You don't need to apologize, Denise said softly. But I don't know how to make it better. I don't know how to be the person I was before. Anna didn't reply right away. She just looked at Denise, her eyes full of something that felt like compassion. But it wasn't the kind of pity Denise had grown accustomed to. It was understanding. For the first time in a long time, Denise realized that Anna wasn't seeing her as someone who needed fixing. She was seeing her for who she was now. A woman who was rebuilding, a woman who was still strong, even if it didn't look the way it used to. You don't need to be who you were before, Anna said finally, her voice low but firm. You just need to be who you are now. And you don't have to do it alone. Denise sat there for a long moment, taking in Anna's words. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for so long felt a little lighter now. Not because it had disappeared, but because Anna had finally acknowledged it. She hadn't tried to change it or tell her to get over it. She had just listened. I'm trying to figure out what that looks like, Denise said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. What it looks like to heal when the world doesn't give you permission to. I think that's the hardest part, Anna replied. Not waiting for permission from anyone else. But you're doing it, Denise. You are healing. Denise smiled. A small, genuine smile that didn't feel forced. For the first time in a long time, she believed it. She didn't have to heal according to someone else's timeline. She didn't have to wait for permission to move forward. She had been moving forward all along, even if no one else could see it. The rain had stopped, and the air was cool with the promise of a new season. Denise stood up, stretching her arms over her head. She looked out at the city around her, the soft glow of the streetlights flickering through the leaves of the trees. St. Louis felt a little different tonight. Smaller, quieter, like she could finally breathe in it. Thank you, Anna, Denise said, her voice full of quiet gratitude. For being here. Anna smiled, reaching out to squeeze her shoulder. Always. And hey, if you ever need a ride to therapy, I'll take you. No more waiting around to heal alone. Denise laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. I might just take you up on that. The two of them stood together, side by side, watching the city unfold in front of them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But Denise had found something in that moment, something she hadn't realized she needed. The understanding that healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy. It was uneven. But it was happening. And that was enough. Denise woke to the soft glow of the morning sun filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across her room. The silence was broken only by the occasional chirp of birds outside her window, a small reminder that the world was continuing on as usual. But today felt different. She felt different. The journey she had been on, the quiet battles fought within the confines of her own mind, had led her here, a place where she could no longer deny the weight of her past. It had been 6 months, but Denise had come to realize something fundamental. The scars on her body might fade with time, but the emotional scars, the ones that were so deeply rooted, so personal, would take longer to heal. They had to be confronted, and she wasn't sure if she was ready. The world had told her that healing would happen quickly, that there was a set path, a formula to follow. But the more Denise thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't follow anyone else's timeline. She had to create her own. She had to make peace with the fact that she would never be the same woman she was before. And that was okay. But the key was to let go of the guilt, the shame, and the anger that had built up inside her over the years. She threw off the covers and sat up, her body groaning in protest, but she ignored it. She had made progress, and she wasn't about to let anything stop her now. Denise made her way to the kitchen, the familiar sounds of the city outside mixing with the soft clink of her cup hitting the counter. She was making her usual coffee, but today her mind was elsewhere. It had been almost a year since the accident, but it still felt as fresh as the day it happened. The trauma, the pain, the overwhelming sense of loss that had followed. It was hard to let go of those things. And then there was her mother, who, despite everything, was still telling her, even now, that she was broken. She didn't know what it meant to heal. She didn't know what it felt like to have someone see you as strong, despite your scars. But she knew that the only way to move forward was to face the past head-on. She grabbed her phone from the counter, checking the time. Her therapist was expecting her in an hour. Denise hadn't been in a while, and part of her wanted to cancel. Part of her didn't want to confront the pain again, didn't want to relive the things that had been buried deep. But the other part of her, the part that had been quietly fighting for months, knew it was time. Time to stop pretending she was okay. Time to stop running from what had happened. She had to deal with it. It was the only way to finally heal. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts, and she walked slowly to answer it. She opened the door to find a man standing there with a small box in his hands. He was wearing the uniform of the delivery service, and his friendly smile was a welcome distraction. "Good morning," he said, holding out the box. "I've got a package for you." Denise smiled, taking the box from him, and glanced at the label. It was from the family estate in Missouri, her aunt's house where she had spent summers growing up. "Thanks," she said, closing the door behind the man. She placed the box on the kitchen counter and opened it slowly. Inside was a set of old photographs, ones she hadn't seen in years. They were pictures of her family, her mother, her aunt, and Denise as a little girl, smiling with a carefree innocence that seemed so far removed from the woman she had become. Denise picked up a photo of herself as a teenager, her arms wrapped around her mother as they stood on the porch of their old house in Kansas City. She could still remember that day, the warmth of the sun, the smell of fresh-cut grass, the sound of laughter that echoed around them. But now, looking at the photo, it felt like she was looking at a stranger. The person in the picture was someone she had lost along the way. Her thoughts turned to her mother, the woman who had once held her close, telling her she was capable of anything. But it hadn't been like that for a long time. Her mother's disapproving voice had become louder, more critical with every passing year. It was as though nothing Denise did could ever be good enough. "You'll never be the same," her mother had said after the accident, her words like daggers, sharp and final. Denise set the photo down, her chest tightening. The pain was still there. The unresolved issues, the words left unsaid, the expectation that she should have healed faster. But she couldn't keep running from it. She couldn't keep pretending it wasn't eating away at her. She walked over to the window, staring out at the streets of St. Louis. The city was alive with the hustle and bustle of people going about their day, and for a moment, Denise felt invisible. She wasn't part of that world anymore. Not yet. But she wasn't the same woman she had been before the accident. She had changed, And that change didn't have to be a bad thing. Could be her strength, her growth, her evolution. She didn't have to let her past define her anymore. It was time to let go of the old version of herself, the one who had lived for the approval of others. The woman who was constantly trying to meet expectations that were never her own. She had to forgive herself for the mistakes, the choices, and the things she had left behind. But most importantly, she had to stop apologizing for her healing process. It was her journey, and it was hers alone. An hour later, Denise was sitting in her therapist's office, the familiar scent of lavender and cedarwood filling the air. The room felt safe, comforting. Her therapist, Dr. Lisa, had been working with her for the last few months, helping her navigate the emotional scars of her past and the trauma of the accident. Today was the day Denise knew she had to confront it all. Dr. Lisa looked at her kindly as she sat down across from Denise. "How have you been, Denise?" Denise hesitated, glancing down at her hands before meeting Dr. Lisa's eyes. "I'm not sure," she said, her voice low. "I feel like I'm making progress, but there's something I can't let go of." Dr. Lisa nodded slowly, giving her space to speak. "I can't stop feeling like I'm still that broken person everyone else sees," Denise continued. "I feel like I'm not allowed to heal at my own pace, like everyone wants me to be fixed already. But I don't think they get it. You're healing, Denise," Dr. Lisa said gently, "and it's okay to take your time. It's okay to not be what others expect you to be. You've been through something incredibly traumatic, and it's going to take time. You don't need to rush the process." Denise felt the knot in her chest loosen a little. She wanted to believe that, but a small part of her still feared that the world would move on without her, that she would be left behind. "I've been so focused on what others think of me," Denise said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought if I could just push through, just get over it, everything would be okay. But I'm still not okay." Dr. Lisa's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to be okay right now. It's okay to be in the middle of healing. You're not broken, Denise. You're just going through something difficult, and that's okay. You don't need to be fixed." Denise nodded slowly, her chest tightening as the weight of the words sank in. She wasn't broken. She was healing. Slowly, steadily, she was healing. As she left the office that afternoon, the air felt different. Lighter, somehow. The weight she had carried for so long still lingered, but it wasn't as crushing. Maybe healing wasn't about reaching some endpoint where everything was perfect. Maybe it was just about being okay with where she was, even if it wasn't where she thought she would be. Denise walked down the street, the setting sun casting long shadows on the pavement. She wasn't there yet, but she was closer, and that was enough for today. The days that followed felt like an unfolding story, each chapter revealing something new. It wasn't the kind of progress that could be measured on a calendar or tracked with a simple before and after. It was slower, more subtle, a shift in how Denise saw herself and how she allowed others to see her. The next week was particularly difficult, but Denise didn't back away. There were still days when the past came crashing in. The memories, the doubts, the familiar shadows of self-doubt that threatened to undo everything she'd worked so hard for. But for the first time, she was ready to face them. Not as a person who was still broken, but as someone who had healed enough to stand tall. It was a Wednesday when she received the call. She had been working late at her job as a graphic designer, the kind of work that always kept her busy but never allowed her to forget how much time had passed. She answered the phone without checking the ID, assuming it was one of the usual telemarketers or wrong numbers. But when she heard the voice on the other end, she froze. Denise! It was her mother. For a moment, Denise's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't heard from her mother in weeks. Not since that last heated conversation. Not since the words about her never healing had hung in the air between them. It was the first time her mother had ever questioned her strength in such a final way. "Mom," Denise said, her voice shaky. "What's going on?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Her mother's voice sounded different this time, hesitant, even vulnerable. I've been thinking a lot about what I said. Denise, about you not being the same. I shouldn't have said that." Denise's heart skipped a beat, a strange mixture of relief and disbelief flooding through her. This wasn't the apology she'd expected, but it was something. It was the first crack in the wall that had stood between them for so long. "I didn't know how to handle everything, you know?" her mother continued. "I didn't want to see you hurting, and I guess I didn't know how to let you heal. I thought if I pushed you, maybe it would help. But I was wrong. I see that now." Denise felt the words like a weight lifting off her chest. She hadn't expected her mother to admit the truth, but it was exactly what she needed to hear. It wasn't about forgiveness, not yet anyway, but it was the first step. The first real step toward rebuilding the relationship they had once shared. I'm sorry too," Denise said softly, her voice steady. "I should have called you more. I should have told you that I was trying, that I didn't need you to fix it. I just needed you to believe in me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When her mother spoke again, her voice was softer, more tender than Denise had ever heard it. "I do believe in you, Denise. I always have. I think I just lost sight of that." Denise leaned back against the kitchen counter, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the walls that had been built between them over the years start to crumble, brick by brick. It wasn't going to be easy. There would still be hard days ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like they were both finally on the same page. "I'll be okay, Mom," Denise said quietly, "but I'm going to need." "I do." And just like that, the conversation ended. No fireworks, no grand resolutions, but something shifted. For the first time in years, Denise felt like she was no longer fighting alone. She wasn't sure what would come next. She wasn't sure if things would go back to the way they had been before the accident. But she knew that, for now, this was enough. It was a quiet triumph, nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, but it was a victory nonetheless. The next few days felt lighter. There was still a sense of tension in the air, the kind of unspoken understanding that neither of them had fully come to terms with what had happened. But Denise felt the first real taste of peace. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting that the past had shaped her, but it didn't have to define her future. One evening, after a long day of work, Denise sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky over St. Louis was dotted with streaks of pink and orange, and the cool evening breeze stirred the leaves on the trees. For the first time in a while, she felt calm, like she was finally in the right place, even if she hadn't fully figured out what that meant. It was then that her phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a text message from Anna. "Hey, want to get dinner tomorrow night? We can catch up. It's been a while." Denise smiled to herself. It had been a while, but the thought of spending time with someone who had stood by her, who had seen her at her lowest and never judged her, felt like exactly what she needed. Slowly, the world was shifting. Slowly, the pieces of her life were coming back together. She typed out a quick reply. "I'd love that. Dinner sounds perfect." It wasn't a big gesture. It wasn't some dramatic change. But for Denise, it was everything. It was the first step toward reclaiming the pieces of herself that had been lost. It was a quiet victory, but it was hers. The next evening, as Denise sat across from Anna at their favorite diner, laughing over shared memories and stories from the past, it felt like a weight had been lifted. She wasn't fully healed. She wasn't fixed, but she was moving forward. She was walking at her own pace, creating a new path, one step at a time. For the first time in a long time, Denise felt at peace with who she was and where she was going. It didn't matter if the world was still moving too fast or if people still didn't understand her journey. What mattered was that she believed in herself. And that was enough. It had been a month since that dinner with Anna, and Denise could feel the subtle transformation taking place within her. She had taken back the reins of her life, one quiet decision at a time. The healing was still happening, of course, but there was a quiet strength building inside her, something that had been absent for so long. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living again. She walked through her apartment one morning, taking in the stillness around her. The sun had already risen, casting a golden hue across the room, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh coffee. For the first time in ages, she felt like she could breathe, deep, full breaths, unencumbered by the weight of fear or doubt. It wasn't perfect, not by any means. There were still days when the memories of the accident haunted her, when the scars on her body seemed to pulse with a reminder of how far she'd come, and how far she still had to go. But she didn't feel defined by them anymore. They were part of her, but they didn't control her. She was more than her past. She picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over the contacts list. There was someone she hadn't spoken to in months. Her brother, Jeff. They had never been particularly close, especially since their lives had taken different paths. But something about the stillness of the morning made her realize how much she missed the connection, the sibling bond that had once been so easy. She dialed his number, unsure of what to expect. It rang twice before Jeff picked up, his voice muffled at first as he adjusted the phone. "Hey, sis," he said, his tone casual. But there was something in his voice that made Denise feel like it had been too long. "Hey," Denise replied, her own voice softer than usual. I just wanted to check in. It's been a while since we talked." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Denise could hear him shifting, maybe sitting up or standing. "You're right," Jeff said finally. "I've been caught up with work and everything. How are you doing?" "Really?" Denise could feel the sincerity in his words, a far cry from the awkwardness that had defined their conversations in the past. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I'm doing better," she said, her voice steady, though she wasn't sure what to expect. "I'm healing. Slowly, but it's happening. I guess I just needed to stop running from it. From everything, you know?" There was a long pause, and for a moment, Denise wondered if she had said too much. But then Jeff spoke, his voice quieter than before. "I'm glad to hear that," he said simply. "It's been a tough road for you. I don't think I really understood what you were going through. I was one of those people who thought you'd just get over it, move on with life, you know? But I see now it's more complicated than that." Denise felt a tightness in her chest, but it wasn't the same weight she had felt before. It was more like the quiet acknowledgement of something that had been left unsaid for far too long. "It's not just about moving on," she replied. "It's about figuring out who I am now, who I want to be, and letting go of what everyone else expects me to be." There was a shift in the conversation, a moment of understanding. Jeff wasn't just hearing her words, he was listening. "I get that," he said, his voice softer now. "I've been thinking about a lot of things too. You know, about how we're all just kind of figuring things out day by day. I don't have all the answers, but I've been learning to be okay with that, with the uncertainty." Denise smiled, a small but genuine smile. It was the first time she had felt this level of understanding between them. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of everything that had happened or just the passage of time, but it felt like a breakthrough. "Well, I'm here if you need me too," Denise said, her voice steady now, full of that quiet strength that had been building. "We don't have to have it all figured out, but we can keep trying, right?" "Right," Jeff replied, and there was a long pause before he added, "Thanks for calling, Denise. Really, it's good to talk like this again." "Anytime," she said, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Take care of yourself." When the call ended, Denise sat quietly for a few moments, letting the weight of the conversation sink in. There was something about the way it had unfolded, something about the genuine connection she'd felt that made her believe, for the first time in ages, that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to align. She wasn't just healing. She was building bridges with people she thought she had lost. She was finding new ways to relate to the world, to those who had once been so close to her. That afternoon, she decided to take a walk, an intentional one. It wasn't about escaping her thoughts or running from anything. It was simply about being present in the moment, allowing herself to feel the air, the sounds, and the life around her. She walked through the streets of St. Louis, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the slight breeze tugging at her jacket. There was something about being outside, in the middle of the world, that made her feel grounded again. She passed by familiar faces, neighbors, old acquaintances, and for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She wasn't just the woman who had been in that accident anymore. She wasn't defined by her scars. She was Denise, a woman who had been through something difficult, yes, but a woman who had come out the other side stronger than before. A woman who could walk down the street without feeling like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner, Denise sat back in her chair and reflected on the day. It had been full of little moments, little victories that added up to something bigger. It wasn't a loud, dramatic triumph. It wasn't a moment that would make the headlines. But it was hers. It was the beginning of something that would last. Tomorrow, she will continue to heal and continue to take small steps forward. But tonight, she allowed herself a quiet celebration. She had faced the past, and she had started to let it go. She had started to embrace the future, the one that was still unfolding before her. And for the first time in a long time, Denise knew that she was on the right path. Denise woke up early the next morning, as she often did now. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting soft, golden rays over the city of St. Louis. The cool morning air drifted through her open window, filling the room with the smell of fresh rain from the night before. It had been a long time since she'd felt the kind of peace that seemed to settle in the air this morning. She had spent the past several weeks embracing the changes that had come her way, even the uncomfortable ones. The small victories, like calling her brother, reconnecting with Anna, and having moments of clarity in therapy, had been hard-earned, but each one had brought her closer to understanding that healing wasn't a linear process. It was more like the weather in St. Louis, unpredictable, full of unexpected shifts, but always moving forward. Today, however, felt different. She felt lighter. The weight that had clung to her for so long, her mother's judgment, the doubts she'd carried about her own strength, the fear of never being good enough, seemed to dissipate little by little. She had been working through the layers of pain and guilt, but it wasn't until today that she realized something. She was ready to let go. She had spent so many months holding on to the belief that the accident had defined her, that it was the thing she would always have to fight against. But now, as she sat in the quiet of her apartment, she understood that letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant accepting. It meant acknowledging that while the accident had shaped her, it didn't have to control her. Denise made her way to the kitchen, a quiet sense of calm enveloping her as she prepared her breakfast. The mundane ritual of brewing coffee, scrambling eggs, and slicing fruit felt grounding, reminding her that life still moved forward, no matter what. She wasn't stuck in the past anymore. She wasn't stuck at all. After breakfast, she sat down at her desk, where the small piles of work waited. It was the usual. Design projects for her clients, emails to answer, and deadlines to meet. But this time, when she opened her laptop, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a chance to move forward and embrace the life she was creating for herself. She pulled up the document for a new project she had taken on, a redesign for a local nonprofit organization, and began drafting ideas. As she typed, the thoughts flowed more freely than they had in weeks. Her mind wasn't clouded with self-doubt anymore. She could focus. She could create. The freedom in that simple act, being able to create without constantly doubting herself, was like a weight lifting off her shoulders. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about pleasing anyone else. It was about the act of doing, of being present in the work, of allowing herself to be exactly where she was. As the day wore on, Denise found herself moving through the hours with a quiet sense of purpose. She left the apartment in the afternoon to run errands, something she had avoided for weeks. It wasn't just about getting things done. It was about re-engaging with the world around her. She passed by the local bookstore, a place she used to frequent often, but hadn't visited in months. Without hesitation, she walked inside. The familiar scent of paper and ink filled the air as she wandered through the aisles, her fingers brushing against the spines of books. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it. The simple act of browsing for something new, something that could ignite a spark inside her. Her eyes caught on a new novel, one that seemed to stand out from the rest. She picked it up and glanced at the back cover. It was a story about redemption, about finding strength in the face of adversity. Exactly what she had been going through. For a moment, she stood there, holding the book in her hands, realizing how far she had come. It wasn't just about healing from the accident. It was about finding a way to live again, to embrace life with open arms, even after the hardest of times. She purchased the book, and as she left the store, she felt a smile spread across her face. She was ready to read it, ready to dive into someone else's story, and in doing so, continue her own. The evening brought with it a sense of quiet reflection. Denise sat in her favorite chair again, this time with the new book in her hands, the cover already cracked open. She hadn't realized how much she had missed the feeling of losing herself in a good story. But as she turned the first page, she couldn't help but think of her own story, the one she had been writing one day at a time without even realizing it. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a message from Anna. "How about a walk tomorrow? It's been a while. We could talk about your next project or just catch up." Denise smiled, her fingers typing a quick reply. "I'd love that. Let's do it." It was an invitation for connection, an invitation to continue the journey. It wasn't just about healing anymore. It was about living. It was about finding new paths, new directions, and taking them with confidence. Later that night, as she sat by the window with the city lights twinkling below, Denise realized that the weight of the past had finally been lifted. She had confronted it. She had learned from it, but it no longer defined her. She was finally walking in the present, with her head held high. It wasn't a dramatic, grand gesture. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of strength that didn't announce itself to the world. But it was there. And it was enough. As she closed the book for the night, Denise placed it on the table beside her and took a deep breath. She was ready for whatever came next. The next few weeks were a blur of new experiences, steady progress, and quiet revelations. Denise had learned to stop rushing through life, to appreciate the small victories that were often overlooked. She had settled into a routine, mornings spent in the comfort of her apartment, afternoons filled with work, and evenings reserved for walks around St. Louis, the city she had once thought she'd leave, but had grown to love more deeply each day. But there was something else bubbling under the surface, something she hadn't quite acknowledged yet. It had been a few days since her last session with Dr. Lisa, her therapist, and though she had felt lighter after their talk, a small part of her knew she was still avoiding something. The one thing she hadn't fully confronted. The one thing that still lingered in the corners of her heart and mind. Her mother. It was hard for Denise to admit, but she had never fully allowed herself to process the complicated, often painful relationship with her mother. Despite the progress she had made in every other area of her life, this one piece felt unresolved, hanging over her like an unresolved note. The phone rang on a Thursday afternoon as Denise was sitting in her living room, scrolling through her design portfolio. The name that appeared on the screen made her pause. "Mom." Denise stared at the phone for a long moment, unsure of what to do. It had been months since they had spoken, and when they did, it was always strained, always filled with the weight of their unspoken history. She had spent so much time pushing that relationship to the back of her mind, pretending it didn't affect her. But the truth was, it did. And if she was truly healing, she knew she had to face this head-on. With a deep breath, she answered the call. "Hello, Denise." Her mother's voice sounded tentative, almost fragile, as if she was testing the waters. "It's me. I wanted to talk." Denise felt a lump rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had waited for this moment, had wanted it for so long, but she wasn't sure how to navigate it. "What's going on, Mom?" Denise asked, keeping her tone even. Her mother sighed heavily. There was a long pause, as though she were gathering the right words. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened. I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry." The words hit Denise like a rush of cold air. It wasn't an apology she had expected, certainly not one that came so easily. She had spent years waiting for this moment, but hearing her mother admit the hurt she had caused felt like an impossible relief. Denise closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "I don't know what to say, Mom." "I don't know either," her mother responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've made mistakes, Denise. I've been so focused on what you should be, and I didn't see who you are. I thought pushing you would make you stronger, but I see now that I was wrong." And I don't want to lose you. Not like this. Denise felt her hands tremble slightly, but she didn't let it show. Her mother had never been one to show vulnerability. The walls that had been built between them for years felt like they were beginning to crumble, piece by piece. You've been so hard on me, Mom, Denise said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the emotions flooding through her. I've spent so much time trying to be the person you wanted me to be. But I'm not that person. I'm not her. And I can't keep pretending to be. There was a long silence, but this time it didn't feel like distance. It felt like the beginning of something real, something hopeful. I never wanted to make you feel that way, her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. I was just scared of seeing you hurt. I've always been so afraid of losing you, Denise, but I see now that I've been pushing you away instead of being there for you. And I'm sorry. Denise's throat tightened, but she didn't back down. She didn't retreat into herself like she had always done before. She was tired of holding everything in, tired of pretending the hurt didn't exist. She had confronted it all, but this moment felt different. I don't know what this means, Mom, Denise said quietly. I don't know how we move forward, but I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. Her mother was silent for a long while, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, gentler. I know, sweetheart, I know, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Denise let out a slow breath. She had never expected this, and yet here it was, a chance to rebuild, to finally have the relationship with her mother she had always wanted. But it would take time to heal the wounds they both carried. I'm willing to try too, Mom, Denise said, her voice full of quiet determination. But we both have to be honest with each other. No more pretending. Her mother's voice softened, a hint of warmth creeping in. I understand, and I promise I'll be here. I won't give up on you. Was the beginning of something she had longed for, something she never thought would come. She took a deep breath and said the words she hadn't said in years. I love you, Mom. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then, through a quiet sob, her mother replied, I love you too, Denise. I really do. As the call ended, Denise sat in the stillness of her apartment, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was freeing. She had confronted the thing that had held her back for so long. She had opened the door to forgiveness, to a new chapter, and to a future where healing wasn't just possible. It was inevitable. The past would always be a part of her, but it didn't have to control her. And for the first time, Denise felt at peace. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength to handle it. The weeks following her conversation with her mother felt like a slow, deliberate journey towards something Denise hadn't fully allowed herself to believe in: peace. There were still moments, of course, when the weight of the past seemed to resurface, unbidden, like an unwelcome visitor. But they were becoming fewer and fewer. Denise had learned that peace wasn't about erasing the past, but about accepting it, about making room for the person she was becoming. As the days turned into weeks, Denise found herself shifting in ways she hadn't expected. The healing, the slow process of rebuilding, was no longer something she had to force. It had become something natural, something that was happening almost imperceptibly, like the gradual change in the seasons. The air around her was lighter, the weight on her shoulders lessened, but she also realized something profound. She had become stronger than she had ever been before. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And that was everything. She sat at the same window she had so many times before, this time watching the sun dip below the horizon with a quiet sense of contentment. The city of St. Louis stretched out before her, its lights twinkling as the evening took over. She had spent so much time trying to run away from her own story, from her own struggles, but now, she saw them for what they were. A part of her journey, a necessary part of who she had become. She had faced the hardest part. Not the accident, not the scars, but the moments when she had doubted her own worth. Those were the moments she had to confront, and now they no longer held the same power over her. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Denise glanced at the screen and saw Anna's name. She smiled as she answered, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her chest. "Hey!" Anna's voice was as upbeat as ever. "I was thinking about grabbing dinner this weekend. How about that new place by the park?" Denise hesitated for only a moment before responding. "That sounds great. I'm in." Anna laughed, a sound that was so familiar, it almost felt like home. "Awesome. I'll make a reservation. It's been way too long since we've had a proper hangout." Denise agreed, and after a few more minutes of planning, they ended the call. Denise set the phone down on the table and let out a long breath. Things are different now. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was making the choice to connect, to live, to rebuild. She wasn't hiding behind her pain or her past. She was choosing to embrace the future with open arms. She leaned back in her chair and thought about how much had changed. There had been a time when she had felt like she was stuck in the rubble of everything that had fallen apart. But now, everything felt like it was coming together. Not perfectly, not in a way that would make the headlines or look glamorous on paper, but in a way that mattered. In a way that was deeply human. As the evening continued, Denise found herself lost in the quiet rhythm of her thoughts, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. It wasn't about some grand transformation, not really. It was about the small, seemingly insignificant moments. The moments when she chose to heal, when she chose to move forward, when she chose to let go of the things that had kept her tethered to a version of herself she no longer recognized. She thought about the moments she had shared with Anna, her brother Jeff, and even her mother. Those were the moments that had mattered most. Those were the moments that had allowed her to heal, to find the strength she hadn't known she possessed. And yet, it wasn't just the people around her who had helped her through. It was the act of standing still, of letting herself be present in her own life. The mornings when she walked through the quiet streets of St. Louis, the nights spent curled up with a good book, the long conversations with friends. These were the moments that had added up to something bigger. These were the moments that had taught her that healing wasn't about racing to the finish line. It was about showing up every day, even on the hardest days. It was late when she finally stood up from her chair, stretching her arms above her head. The city outside had quieted, the hum of traffic replaced by the sound of crickets in the distance. She walked to her bedroom and changed into something more comfortable, a simple pair of sweatpants and an old, oversized hoodie. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace with the woman who stared back at her. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't need to be. There would still be days when she struggled. There would still be moments of doubt, moments when the past would try to creep back in. But Denise knew something now that she hadn't known before. It was okay to struggle. It was okay to take her time. She was allowed to be imperfect, and that didn't make her any less strong. And so, she smiled at her reflection. A smile that came from somewhere deep inside the woman who had fought for her healing, for her strength, for her life. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, and Denise picked it up, seeing a text from her mother. "I've been thinking about you a lot today. I hope you know how much I love you, and how proud I am of everything you've done. I know it hasn't been easy, but you're doing it. And I'm here for you, no matter what." Denise felt tears prick at the corner of her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of closure, of something that had been left unsaid for too long. She quickly typed a response, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I love you too, Mom, and I'm getting there. Slowly, but I'm getting there." She set the phone down again, the weight of her mother's words settling into her heart. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. It was a sign that the walls between them were crumbling, bit by bit. Denise turned off the lights and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The world outside was quiet, but inside, her heart was full. There was still so much to do, so many more moments to experience. But for tonight, for the first time in what felt like forever, Denise was content. She had come full circle. Tomorrow would come with its own set of challenges, of course. She knew that. But for now, she allowed herself the grace to simply be. to rest, to heal, to exist. She closed her eyes, letting the soft rhythm of the world outside lull her to sleep. Tomorrow was another day, another chance to keep moving forward. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be.